In the pouring rain, 65-year-old Arthur clutched his newborn grandson, Leo, his frail form caught between the flashing red and blue police lights. With his silver hair and the weary lines etched into his face, he looked vulnerable, an easy target for the two officers and their snarling K9s. They saw a confused old man, lost and out of place. But as one officer unclipped the leash and the beast lunged, the look in Arthur's eyes wasn't fear. It was an ancient, chilling calm from forgotten battlefields. Before I show you the nearly invisible motion Arthur made next, the silent command that froze a trained attack dog in its tracks, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get back to that stormy night and see exactly how it all began. The night wasn't supposed to be anything more than a simple act of grandfatherly duty. Arthur's daughter was down with the flu, and he was taking a shortcut through the quieter, tree-lined streets to drop off a bag of medicine and soup. Cradled against his chest, wrapped in a thick blue blanket, his grandson Leo slept soundly, oblivious to the storm that was gathering both in the sky and on the street. The steady rhythm of the rain on his worn khaki jacket was a familiar, almost soothing sound, reminiscent of monsoon seasons in distant lands he tried to forget. He adjusted his grip on the precious bundle, his knuckles stiff from the cold and old age, but his hold was as firm and steady as it had been decades ago, holding a rifle. Suddenly, headlights cut through the deluge, pinning him in their glare. A police cruiser slid to a halt, blocking his path. Another pulled up silently behind him. The night's quiet shattered. Two officers emerged, their heavy boots splashing in the growing puddles. The younger one, Miller, had a tense energy about him, his hand already resting on his belt, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. The older one, Davis, moved with a kind of bored indifference, as if this was just another routine stop, another piece of paperwork. Evening. Miller's voice was sharp, accusatory. "Bit late for a walk, isn't it, old man? What's in the blanket?" Arthur felt the familiar tightening in his gut, the same cold knot of caution that would form when patrolling the perimeter of an airbase in hostile territory. This was not a war zone. This was his home. Yet, the air was thick with the same unvoiced hostility. "It's my grandson," Arthur said, his voice calm, betraying none of the sudden adrenaline coursing through him. "I'm just taking some medicine to my daughter's house a few blocks over." Miller scoffed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Your daughter? Right. Let's see some ID." As Arthur, with extreme care, tried to shift the baby to one arm to reach for his wallet, Leo stirred and let out a soft cry. The sound seemed to agitate Miller further. "Just stay where you are. Don't move." He exchanged a look with Davis, who simply shrugged. In their eyes, Arthur wasn't a grandfather. He was a potential problem, a deviation from the norm that needed to be contained. His age, his race, the late hour, it all added up to a verdict already decided. Memories flashed in Arthur's mind, unbidden. The scent of hot sand and engine oil in the Kandahar desert. The weight of his gear under a relentless sun. He remembered Rex, his K9 partner, a magnificent German shepherd whose loyalty was absolute, whose senses were an extension of his own. They had trusted each other with their lives, a bond forged in chaos and silence. He could feel that same silence now, a tense, humming void between him and the officers. "I'm tired of this," Miller grumbled, his patience gone. He strode to his cruiser and flung open the back door. A low growl pierced the sound of the rain. A powerful Belgian Malinois, muscles coiled like steel springs, emerged, its eyes locked on Arthur. Its teeth were bared, a line of saliva dripping from its jaw. The sight should have terrified him. Instead, a profound stillness settled over Arthur. He had trained dogs, just like this one, bred for their intelligence, their drive, their controlled aggression. He knew its mind better than the officer holding its leash. Miller barked an order, and the dog lunged forward, straining against its restraint, its snarls echoing in the enclosed street. Arthur didn't flinch. He shielded Leo with his body, his gaze fixed on the animal. And then, as Miller took another step forward, Arthur's right hand, hanging loosely at his side, made a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture. It wasn't a sign of surrender or fear. It was a command, a slight, upward flick of two fingers, a signal so deeply embedded in the dog's training that it bypassed the officer's shouted words entirely. The Malinois halted mid-lunge, skidding on the wet asphalt. It stopped snarling, a confused whine escaping its throat as it looked from Arthur to its handler, its body trembling with the conflict of two opposing commands. The immediate, unnatural silence that followed the dog's halt was more jarring than its previous aggression. The rain continued to fall, but the central tension of the scene had completely shifted. Officer Davis, who had been leaning against the cruiser, straightened up, his apathy vanishing, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. Officer Miller stood frozen for a second, his face a mask of confusion that quickly curdled into rage. In his world, things were simple. You gave an order, and a trained animal obeyed. This was not simple. This was an intolerable break in the chain of command. What the hell? Miller spat, yanking hard on the leash. Attack! He roared, his voice cracking with fury. The Malinois flinched at his handler's tone, but did not advance. It took a hesitant step back, its ears flattened, letting out another low whine. It kept its eyes locked on Arthur, on the old man who stood as still as a statue, his hand now perfectly calm at his side. The dog was trapped between its conditioned response to Miller's voice and a deeper, more ingrained instinct that recognized a different kind of authority in Arthur's presence. Useless mutt, Miller cursed, his face flushing with humiliation. He saw Arthur's calm demeanor not as a sign of innocence, but as a form of mockery. To him, this old man was somehow tricking them, defying him. He refused to accept what he was seeing. Turning on his heel, he stomped toward the second cruiser. You think you're smart? Huh? He yelled over his shoulder at Arthur. Let's see you handle this one. He wrenched open the rear door of the other car and dragged out a second K9. This one was even larger, a dark-furred German shepherd that radiated a raw, barely contained power. Its growls were deeper, more guttural, and it immediately lunged into the night, its paws splashing sheets of water as it fixed its predatory gaze on Arthur and the child in his arms. The sight of this new, more ferocious animal sent a fresh wave of memories crashing over Arthur. He wasn't in America anymore. He was back in Afghanistan, on a moonless night during a raid on an insurgent compound. The air was electric with danger, the explosive crackle of gunfire echoing through narrow alleys. He remembered crouching behind a crumbled wall, his own shepherd, Rex, pressed against his side, trembling not with fear, but with anticipation. He remembered how he'd calmed the dog, not with words, but with his own steady breathing, with the low, resonant hum he would create in his chest, a signal of calm that traveled down the leash and into the animal's very soul. He had learned that true command wasn't about shouting. It was about presence, about an unspoken language of mutual respect and absolute authority. That battlefield was a lifetime ago, separated by years and continents, but the language had never left him. It lived in his bones, in the timbre of his voice, in the unwavering steel of his gaze. As the second officer, Davis, struggled to control the new dog and Miller screamed, "Get him! Take him down!" Arthur did not make another hand signal. He did something even more profound. He shifted his weight slightly, shielding Leo completely, and drew a slow, deliberate breath. As the German shepherd charged, closing the distance in a blur of black fur and bared teeth, Arthur let that breath out. And on that breath, he formed a single, powerful syllable. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the storm like a razor. It was a word from an old training manual, a relic of a different time and a different army. A German word. Halt! The command was uttered with guttural resonance that spoke of pure, unquestionable authority. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The charging shepherd, an unstoppable force of aggression just a moment before, slammed on its paws as if it had hit an invisible wall. It skidded on the slick pavement, its powerful body twisting, and ended up sitting abruptly, its chest heaving. It stared at Arthur, its ears perked, its tail frozen. The primal fury in its eyes was replaced by a look of complete and utter bewilderment. It, too, was now paralyzed between a handler's frantic shouts and a command that resonated with the very core of its training. The street fell silent once more, leaving only the sound of two powerful animals whining softly in the rain, their obedience stolen by a quiet old man they had never met. The sight of a second K9, bigger and more aggressive than the first, sitting obediently in a puddle at a single word from a stranger, shattered the officer's reality. This was no longer an anomaly. It was a complete subversion of their power. The dynamic on the street had been irrevocably broken. Officer Miller's face went from red with rage to pale with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Officer Davis fumbled for his shoulder radio, his voice strained as he spoke into it. "Dispatch, we have a situation, corner of Oak and Elm. Suspect is... he's controlling the K9 units. I don't know how. Requesting backup." The word suspect sounded absurd now, even to him. They had come here as the hunters, the authority figures. Now, they were the ones who were confused and on the defensive. They were looking at Arthur not as a feeble old man, but as something incomprehensible and therefore dangerous. The fear in their eyes began to curdle back into anger, the desperate fury of men whose control has been stripped away. For Arthur, the officer's panic was a distant noise. Their fear gave him no satisfaction. Instead, a lifetime of slights, of being underestimated and pushed aside, began to surface within him. He remembered the letter he received after his honorable discharge, a crisp, impersonal thank you from a nation he had served in the shadows. He remembered asking for help transitioning back to civilian life, only to be met with bureaucratic silence. The nightmares of the war, he fought through those alone. He remembered the doors that had closed in his face when he applied for jobs, the polite but firm rejections. He remembered the security guards who would follow him through stores, the looks of suspicion he'd receive for simply existing in spaces where he was deemed not to belong. The bitter, crushing irony of it all washed over him. The same skills that had made him an invaluable asset in a war zone, the same calm under pressure that had saved lives, were invisible here. Here, in the country he had sworn to protect, his service was erased, and all they saw was the color of his skin, the gray in his hair, the threat they had invented in their own minds. For a fleeting moment, the weight of it all, the sheer injustice of his journey from decorated soldier to nameless suspect on a rainy street, threatened to crush him. He felt his shoulders sag, but then a soft whimper came from the bundle in his arms. Leo, his grandson, the tiny, trusting life pressed against his chest, was his anchor, his reason. He was not just a forgotten veteran anymore. He was a protector, a grandfather. That thought reignited a fire within him, a resolve forged not in anger, but in love. He could not, would not, let his grandson's first memory of the world be of his grandfather's humiliation. Not tonight. Not ever. With that clarity, his posture changed. He rose to his full height, the rain dripping from his silver hair like a crown. His eyes, once passive, now held a formidable glint as he locked his gaze on the unraveling officers. Miller, in a final desperate act of intimidation, drew his baton. He slammed it against the hood of the cruiser with a loud, metallic crack that echoed like a gunshot through the night. "On your knees. Now," he screamed, his voice raw with a fury that bordered on panic. He advanced, the baton held high, a clear threat to both Arthur and the child. But Arthur didn't see a powerful officer anymore. He saw a scared man, lashing out because he had lost control. And Arthur knew, with a trembling certainty, that this confrontation was no longer about just getting home safely. It was about reclaiming a lifetime of dignity. The baton's sharp crack against metal was a declaration of war. Miller's advance, his face contorted in a mask of rage, meant that the situation had crossed a critical threshold. There was no more room for misunderstanding, no chance for de-escalation through passivity. Arthur knew that to protect his grandson, he had to end this, not by yielding, but by taking absolute control. The instincts of the old command handler, long dormant, fully awakened. He was no longer just reacting. He was commanding the battlefield. As Miller closed in, Arthur dropped smoothly to one knee, creating a smaller target and shielding Leo's body with his own. The movement was fluid, economical, the action of a soldier who knew how to move under fire. Then he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried an undeniable weight, a tone of pure command that every trained dog on the planet would recognize as alpha. He issued a short, sharp sequence of German commands, the language of their deepest imprinting. Fuss, heel, Wache, guard. The effect was electric. The two K9s, who had been sitting in confused paralysis, snapped into action as if jolted by a current. Their conflict vanished, replaced by the clarity of a direct order from a recognized authority. They moved with the stunning precision of their training. The Malinois and the shepherd simultaneously broke from their positions. But they didn't charge Arthur. Instead, they wheeled around, their movements perfectly synchronized, and placed themselves directly in front of him. They turned to face their own handlers, planting their feet firmly on the wet asphalt. A low, rumbling growl started deep in their chests, a protective warning directed at the two shocked officers. They had become a living shield of muscle and fur, a loyal barrier between their new commander and the men who had brought them. The power dynamic on the street didn't just shift, it shattered and reformed in an instant. Miller froze mid-stride, his baton still raised, his mouth hanging open. He stared at the backs of his own canine partners, now standing guard for the man he was about to strike. Davis, who had been inching forward, stumbled back, his hands raised in a gesture of pure shock. The weapons they had brought to intimidate and subdue had just been turned against them. Silence descended again, profound and absolute, broken only by the gentle patter of the rain and a soft, contented sigh from Leo, who had slept peacefully through the entire ordeal in the safety of his grandfather's arms. In that fragile silence, Arthur rose slowly to his feet. He didn't look triumphant or angry. He simply looked weary, but his spirit was unbroken. He stood tall, a drenched, unarmed, elderly black man who had commanded obedience without a leash and respect without a badge. He held the gaze of the two officers for a long moment, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. Their arrogance had been replaced by a raw, primal fear. Finally, Arthur turned. He didn't run. He walked. With a calm, deliberate pace, he moved past the police cruisers, away from the flashing lights. For a few steps, the two K9s flanked him, their heads held high, a silent honor guard, before a quiet, almost imperceptible nod from Arthur released them. They trotted back to their stunned handlers, their duty done. The officers could only watch, paralyzed by disbelief, as Arthur disappeared into the rainy darkness. He never looked back. He left behind nothing but the story of a night when the tools of oppression became the guardians of the innocent, and a quiet old man reminded the world that the deepest strength often resides where it is least expected. Arthur's story is more than just a tense standoff on a rainy night. It reveals a profound truth. True authority doesn't come from a uniform or a weapon, but from deep within, from character, from experience, and from a dignity that cannot be stripped away. It's a powerful reminder that the people our society often overlooks and deems powerless are sometimes the ones carrying the most formidable strength of all. Have you ever completely misjudged someone based on their appearance, only to be stunned by their hidden depths or skills? What would you have done if you were a neighbor watching this unfold from your window? Do you believe there are silent heroes like Arthur all around us? Their incredible stories and strengths hidden in plain sight, just waiting for a moment to be revealed to a world that isn't paying attention? If this story about dignity and hidden power moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales about underestimated heroes. Share this video with someone who believes in showing respect to our elders and veterans. We read every single comment, and your stories matter to us. We believe in creating a respectful and thoughtful community in our comment section. More stories about justice and unexpected triumphs are waiting for you on the screen right now. Click on one of those to watch next. And we will see you tomorrow with a brand new story about a teacher who outsmarted a cyberbully with a brilliant lesson.